Good morning, everybody. Okay, so for the next session, I should be joined by 5 experts, actually. I can only see 4 on my screen. So I can see, so we've got Pauline from In Control Scotland. We should have Ailsa, but I don't see her yet. We've got Patrick from Turning Point Scotland, Faith from Homeless Network Scotland, and Rebecca from East Lothian Council. Well, welcome to the panel. We're going to talk about, here's Ailsa. Hi, Ailsa. We're going to talk about self-directed support in a homelessness policy context. And I should have said, my name's Janine. I'm head of the homelessness unit at the Scottish Government. I'm going to start actually by asking my 5 experts on the panel to just give a short introduction, to tell people who they are, what organisation they're representing, and to talk about the importance of support in their work, in their life, and the other challenges to do that in 3 minutes. So I wonder, Patrick, if I can start with you.
Thanks for inviting me. I am Patrick. I'm Director of Operations for Turning Point Scotland. I guess the last 18 months support has had to change. And what we've seen within Turning Point Scotland, well, firstly, we work across a number of different care groups. Normally when I'm at a homelessness thing, I only ever talk about the homelessness side of things, but we work in terms of alcohol and other drugs, justice, mental health, learning disability and forensics. And a big part of that actually is supported through an SDS framework. But what we've seen over the last 18 months is an adaptation, I think, of some of the support that we deliver. We've had much greater use of digital, particularly within areas of homelessness. Probably, interestingly, where there is SDS contracts within learning disabilities and mental health, and where we're registered differently, there has to have been, or there was much more a continuation of a service as was, and some of that's about kind of medication. So I suppose I've seen different parts of our organisation evolve and respond differently to the support needs of others over the last 18 months.
Patrick, can I come to Faith next, please? Faith, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Faith. I represent Homeless Network Scotland. I more as a lived experience of homelessness. I was homeless in 2008 in Inverness. I was initially, I was off sick at the time. I was a staff nurse for 30 years of pain, back pain, and my own experience of the local council when I was saying the hostel I was in, it's painful to go up and down the stairs. Yes, we know, but I got left to it even though I kept telling them, and there was medical evidence to show that I was struggling with the stairs. So from that, we went down the council and was going, you're breaking the law, do something, and got shifted out within 6 weeks, which a lot of the people there were there for 6 months a year and going, how come you got out so quick? So we were quite proactive, but so I got involved within Homeless Network Scotland because I'm aware that the lack of support with people with health issues who are homeless. And when I was well enough, I did a lot of work within Glasgow homelessness services, like Blue Triangle, the council, when I was doing my BA. And a lot of the hostels there do not have disability access. There's a lot of stairs, and I stopped doing that work because I was actually struggling with the stairs because of chronic back pain. So, and the past 18 months, I've started doing work with Homeless Network Scotland, but with COVID, I do this because I have chronic back pain. All the services I've had for support for pain control are actually gone. So that's what I'm now in process of dealing with, but that's a separate issue, and that's my only whinge about that. But I'm working. help working with Homeless Network Scotland, just trying for practical support. That's my comments.
Much, Faith, for those personal insights. Can I ask Pauline can you introduce yourself, Pauline?
Thanks, Janine. Hi, I'm Pauline Lunn. I'm the Director for In Control Scotland. I've got quite a long history with self-directed support. I used to work for a charity called Enable Scotland on a project a way back almost 10 years ago when the SDS bill was first introduced, and I worked supporting people and organisations to think about what the new legislation might mean for them in practice. I then went away and worked for other organisations, and I spent the last 6 years primarily working in the homelessness sector. So I've been almost an SDS returnee in my new role. So In Control Scotland's a national charity that works alongside people using social care services and people who support them, trying to make sure that people are able to get the support they need to live a good life. We started off in 2006 as a project and then evolved into our main focus, which is building a sustainable system of self-directed support. We've spent the last 12 years working together with people using services, with family carers, social care providers and local authorities. And we share good practice, we co-design systems and processes, and we spend time advocating for people's human rights. So I suppose in the last 18 months, I've shifted bits of the sector, and it's nice to come back to the world of SDS, but I'm in a bit of two minds, I suppose. I'm surprised sometimes at how slow progress has been made for some folk in realising their rights, but I'm also really pleased to see this continued evolution of self-directed support and seeing these new conversations starting to emerge, like given my history, really interested in how we can explore SDS for people living in homelessness. So it's just always struck me that sometimes the kind of condition or diagnosis of homelessness can supersede or seem to supersede other care needs, and that it can be tricky for people with long-term conditions or disabilities to get the same support as people who aren't homeless. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks very much, Pauline. Can I turn to Rebecca now?
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm the team manager for housing strategy at East Lothian Council. So I have responsibility for the local housing strategy, which is a 5-year statutory document that provides the strategic direction to tackle housing need and demand across all tenures, as well as informing investment in housing and housing related services across East Lothian. So that includes things like housing care and support as well. I think provision of care and support has always been central to the sort of day-to-day work we do in strategy, and whether that's looking at the services available in the county and ensuring they're adaptable to meet the needs of our changing population, and also how we deliver in new and creative ways. But for me, the last 18 months has kind of forced me a little bit more to stop thinking or sticking with the status quo. And continue asking some awkward and sometimes really quite unpopular questions about how we deliver support within local authorities, but also how we deliver housing and whether that's sustainable or conducive to enabling individuals to live their lives in the way they want to. I think it's about ensuring that new housing and communities are developed in a way so that human connections can be built and sustained, and where informal support is supported as well. And that doesn't just rely on support services, but also access to places and spaces, as well as ensuring that the right homes are being delivered in the right places.
I'd love to hear more about some of those awkward questions you've been asking later. And finally, Ailsa, can you?
Yeah, thanks, Janine. So I'm the project manager for the self-directed support team, and we're hosted in Social Work Scotland, and we're funded by Scottish Government. I am seconded into that role for a time-limited period, just until March 2022, to lead a team of 4 who have been tasked with developing a national framework for self-directed support. I do have a background in homelessness and housing support. I undertook a master's on personalisation of services way back in 2016. I started out in the social work department in Dundee in 2006 as supporting people officer with a remit of homelessness and housing support, making sure that the strategic plan for housing support was developed at that time. And then I continued with that homelessness and housing support as part of my overall portfolio over the years. So for the past, we've been in post for 22 months. we were funded for the first 18 months to look at developing that national framework. And as Martin has already described, we've developed a set of 11 standards. Now, those 11 standards have been developed because we know that self-directed support has not been implemented as intended. And how do we know this? Well, first and foremost, people tell us. The people who actually want to exercise their rights around self-directed support, taking on direct payments, exercising the right to option 2s, and even option 3s, which is also a choice, is not really being played out in the way that it was intended by the legislation. So we need to have a really good look at that. So groups such as the SDS Collective, the People-Led Policy Panel of the Scottish Government, they all tell us that things aren't working very well. So how did we develop the standards? So what we've done is we've used an approach called active implementation science. And active implementation science is really pretty simple, to be honest with you, where it requires us to pull into a central pot all of the best evidence-based practice that has happened to date. And what we did was we've used evidence that has come out from Care Inspectorate thematic inspections around self-directed support, Audit Scotland reports, the recently published My Support, My Choice, which was published in October and undertaken by the Alliance in Self-Directed Support Scotland. We've looked at research that has been done by the Simon community, and more recently, which I'm really pleased to say, Martin highlighted Felicity Morrow's research, and we're hearing about that this afternoon, so we'll hopefully pull that into our pot as well, with some of that really good learning. So we wanted to try and pull together a picture of what good SDS looks like, so that then we can then replicate that into the standards, into a national framework, and share that with local authorities, because actually, to be fair to local authorities, we've engaged with them, we've engaged with our national partners, we have a national steering group, we do lots of consultation, and actually when we consulted with the local authorities, the main message was, yes, this legislation's been around since 2013, but actually we're a bit stuck. And we're a bit stuck because of a lot of things that are going against the implementation of self-directed support. One being the attitude towards risk and appetite towards risk. Doing things differently might bring the local authority into disrepute. If a local authority is seen as funding camper vans and hot tubs instead of traditional respite, or then that's not attractive to local authorities. So we need this year, what we're doing is we're putting those standards to the test and working through that attitude and appetite to risk as well, to try and unpick that and try and get underneath that problem. So the standards aren't just sort of empty statements that this is what you need to achieve. What we've tried to do is try to pull together all of that best evidence-based practice to actually say, well, here's the standard, here's what you're striving towards as a bare minimum, but here's how you do it. Here's how you put it into place. Here's all the good resources that are out there that can help you put this into place. And this year we're working with NEST to update all of the national resources around self-directed support to bring them in line with the standards, and to update them. So self-directed support is not an easy thing to implement. It's very, very complicated because it requires a whole 360 bird's eye view of the whole system, not just those who are undertaking assessments. And it's about making sure that all the actors in the system are trained and skilled and understand what self-directed support is. Martin talked about that the need for workers to go out and do an assessment. They do an outcome-focused assessment, then they have to convert it into deficits to actually release funds. Well, that suggests to me that actors in the system don't really understand what's going on. And so we need to bring all of the actors in the system up to speed in terms of what self-directed support is, in terms of the values and the principles, and what needs to happen. And that includes finance professionals, it includes commissioners, it includes leaders. Leaders need to be behind this, and leaders need to give permission to the frontline workers to be able to deliver this. If the leaders are not behind it, then it's not going to happen. And that's one of the key principles of active implementation. So
thanks, Ailsa. I'm just thinking you might be answering all the questions that I'm going to put to the panel shortly. So if you don't mind, I'll stop you there, because we're going to frame the discussion around 3 questions, if you don't mind. And I hope that delegates can hear everyone properly. Faith, I'm so glad we've had you back after your technical problems. I'll leave you to the end, actually. So what we've heard this morning from Dr. Martin Kettle, so we've heard about the self-directed support strategy in Scotland. We've heard about direct payments. We know that homelessness policy is modernising, evolving. And so my first question to the panel here is, what do you see as the main opportunities for self-directed support when you look through a homelessness lens? Patrick, can I come to you first with that question?
Sure, it's a great question. Thanks, Janine. I think that the first thing I'd like to say is that we have to remind ourselves that homelessness is not a care group. So what we have is people who are affected by homelessness who in their own right would attract an SDS budget. And I think that if we look at one of the great drivers around rapid rehousing transition, that wonderful word rapid, I think that there's something about getting it right at the beginning. So one of the things, I'll give you a wee quick case study. We won a big contract in Glasgow a few years ago for housing support, and we worked alongside the Health and Social Care Partnership who commissioned us to deliver it. And one of the things that we recognised was there were people who were being badged as being homeless, being supported for a long period of time, but actually, although they needed support, they didn't necessarily need support under the badging of homelessness. So what we were then able to do at that point, we had a really good commissioner, Angela Dowdall. She worked with us to then work with Raymond Bell, who was the head of commissioning, to actually say some of these individuals need to continue to be supported, but let's support them under SDS. And the Health and Social Care Partnership were very proactive around doing that. So there's something about, for me, within the system, getting it right at the beginning. So the other thing that we see within that homelessness population, and maybe the population that myself and Pauline, she worked at Why People, are much more used to working with, which is multiple complex needs. So people whose homelessness is only one element of what they're dealing with other complex issues. And I think when that presents, if we could somehow within the system look at the opportunity to implement SDS in a different way. So get it at the beginning and get it at the other side of it. And the other thing, just my wee final point, is Turning Point Scotland, alongside lots of other people, have been really, real advocates of Housing First, and we've seen that translate into policy. And sometimes one of the things that can make commissioning nervous, rightly so, in terms of Housing First, is how long that it lasts. A key principle in Housing First is we will give you support for as long as you need it. And that's difficult if you're Becker, if you're in a local authority and you're looking at how you fund that. But I think there is a way of doing it if you translate some of that into an SDS world. And my final point the point that I made to Martin, is that I think that sometimes the demographic, and I'm generalising, people who have been traumatised within a system, they can sometimes find it very difficult to navigate and be proactive around the SDS system. So there's something about how we empower people to do that.
Thanks so much. A lot of really provocative points there. Thank you. Pauline, can I come to you? Can you tell us what you see as the main opportunities?
Absolutely, and echo a lot of what Patrick just said as well, and I'll maybe just build on some of it a wee bit. I think the biggest opportunity in self-directed support for the homelessness world is trying to think of a separation of homelessness from continuing care needs, and not having that binary or siloed thinking that if you're homeless, you only need a certain type of support that focuses on a certain need. So exactly what you were just saying, Patrick. I want to take the Housing First parallel a wee bit further, I suppose, which is So Housing First says if you meet someone's immediate need for housing, then you can deal with the other drivers or symptoms of homelessness, like addictions, for example, and that should mean you're less likely to become homeless again. If we can continue that kind of thinking a wee bit more widely into social care needs for people going through homelessness, like if you're on the autism spectrum and you're getting support for your autism, or you have a physical disability and you're getting support for that, then you're also less likely to struggle in the future, and you'll be much more likely to manage your own home in the longer term. Dr. Martin Kettle kind of touched on the nature of duty this morning, and I suppose this is where it gets a wee bit tricky, is that if the local authority has a statutory duty, if you're homeless, then the housing or homelessness bit of the council assumes that responsibility for it. But if you were coming under a social work or social care need, it would be social work that would assume that duty. But I think the thing for us is to examine whose duty is. It's the local authority at the end of the day. It's the same body. And the legislation does allow for referrals to get made to social work if you've got a need for it. It's just how we untangle those various duties and whose responsibility it is, I suppose. But yeah, and just touching, I suppose, again on what you said, Patrick, about Housing First, where we're almost... there's the potential to undo some of the potential blockages in the system. If you are getting support through Housing First, you've got a permanent home, but you might have a disability or something that gets in the way of you being fully independent or meeting your goals, or whatever that is, without some kind of support or service. We could almost free up a bit of capacity in Housing First services by just expanding our thinking and putting people more towards the kind of general social care budget. Final wee thing I'll just say is that some of the values that underpin SDS are choice and freedom and flexibility and dignity. And I think the biggest opportunity in front of us today is to think about what those might look and feel like for people going through homelessness.
So much, Pauline. Rebecca, can I ask you this question? What do you see as the main opportunities for self-directed support?
Yeah, a lot of what Patrick and Pauline have already said, and I think really it speaks a lot to the prevention agenda coming through homelessness, and really working for housing homelessness teams to be working really closely with health and social care partners and getting away from those silos. I think as well, it really lends itself to the rapid housing approach, and that move away from support being tied to accommodation. That to receive support, you have to be in that supported accommodation, and for individuals to be able to access that, regardless of where they are, as local authorities are winding down temp accommodation. I'd also quite like to see how we could develop it, especially for rough sleepers and those with sort of entrenched mistrust of services, and how it can help, sort of personalised budgets in that sense as well.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Faith, can I come to you now? What do you see are the main opportunities for self-directed support?
Actually providing the support. I'm a carer for somebody who's got mental health problems. Self-directed support would be a struggle for this particular person. And I'm an in-law with somebody who's autistic, and last year running around Glasgow looking for her when she was having several suicide attempts, and now very little support going through the crisis team, and then being sent home and then having to go through the suicide attempts again. So reality sometimes is different from what is there. If there's actual provision for support for people with mental health issues, physical disabilities, it would be okay. I know I'm sounding very pessimistic, but I'm running from reality of experience of having family members being carer and not having the support there. And from my caring issues, I had one phone call, I think 3 months ago. You all right? Yes. Do you want teaching on dementia? No, I was a staff nurse and worked in a dementia unit. I do know what I'm doing. And yeah, when it works, but my reality is it doesn't. And I've had that experience when I was homeless myself, having to go down the council and go, look, you're breaking the law, houses. I know that was a little while ago, but I'm working within Glasgow, the homeless units. Yes, the support there, but I'm sounding very cynical and against it. I know I have seen self-directed care and people who are disabled using it to pay staff to care for themselves and having control. So I've seen it within the how or within the community when it does work. But people who have got health issues, mental health issues, not so much dementia, that was just a side issue. It can be a struggle, especially if there's problems as well. And I've seen COVID having a lot of issues with family members. And how deep is that? I'm sounding very cynical and anti this self-care, but reality is, can everybody do it? And is there support there?
No, I think Faith, you're saying what Martin was saying, is that there's inconsistency in support, and also I think navigating the system, bureaucracy is a huge barrier. So thank you very much for those points.
If I was homeless again, I'm very proactive. I could do it myself because I've got the ability to do it, but whether other people have, I don't know.
Sure. Thank you. And finally, Ailsa, what do you see as the main opportunities?
So I agree with Patrick and Pauline and Rebecca. I mean, all of these points, but I think I would like to just pick up on some of the things that Faith has just highlighted, and actually just to demonstrate some of the issues that we have with the current system, and to maybe provide a wee bit of reassurance that, you know, things are currently being looked at through the National Care Service that's being proposed. So I think one of the big challenges that's out there that has led to the system being completely broken is the fact that people that Patrick was referring to that are within the homeless sector, homelessness isn't a client group, and basically, you know, if they do have higher level needs, they get referred into the social work department. They may not meet eligibility criteria. People have to be sitting at critical in lots of local authorities to be actually to receive a service, and they get turned away. What's actually happened as a result of that is lots of local authorities through our national partners in HIS have developed community-led support models. And those community-led support models have rallied around and picked up all of the people who don't meet those critical levels of need, bringing together housing, OTs, physios, community link workers, social prescribers, you know, you name it, anyone can be in those community-led support models. And, you know, there's a difference. So, you know, you've got your people being dealt with at the highest level, and, you know, being able to access self-directed support budgets at critical level. The mental health scenario that you provided, Faith, is something that we have heard from local authorities that we're working with this year. What they say is basically when people hit mental health crisis, i.e., you know, they're about to commit suicide, and they've had an episode that maybe requires them to be sectioned or what have you, and that's critical. Anything below that, it does not meet eligibility criteria. So therefore, then these people do not then tap into self-directed support budgets. So then the only things that are left for them are the things that are available in the community, i.e. housing support and, you know, a wee bit of physio, OT, health inputs, whatever. So we've got people being dealt with at the highest level, and we've got a little bit of housing support here, but there's nothing much really in the middle. And that's what we're hoping to address when we go forward with the National Care Service. The National Care Service consultation that was published by Derek Feely is advocating the abolition of eligibility criteria. a shift towards, not just looking at people's presenting needs, but actually, are people leading meaningful lives, independent lives, from a rights base, a human rights base? And that's the whole intention going forward. So I just wanted to make those points, that actually there is an acknowledgement of the system being broken, but there's also some really good and solutions trying to be found at the moment to try and to help things going forward.
I'm glad to hear that there are solutions. Right, I'm going to ask you a tougher question now. So I hope you've all had your coffee. So we know local partners are responsible for making it possible for a person to access support. And today the conference it's all about choice. But how do people exercise choice and control if local options for those services are limited? What more can be done? Patrick, can I come to you first?
It's a great question, isn't it? I suppose, that I was trying to remember this, Janine, when you and I were speaking. There was an academic that I read, also got to do a wee part of an MSc, Scottish Government paid for, and it was around personalisation. I suppose the academic that most resonated for me was Ian Ferguson, and he spoke a lot about the illusion of choice. And about sometimes as well, some of the dangers within personalisation is that we otherize people who are not active consumers, who are not able to navigate themselves in a system, who are much more, I suppose, classed as passive recipients of support. And I think if Faith touched on some of that, really the key that Faith said was, or the key sentence for me was, if I was homeless again because of my experience in nursing, because of that past experience of having lived that, then I would know what to do differently. And I think that there's something for me about how we support people who are not sometimes in a place to actively choose their support providers. There's still something about working with people in a way that that can enable that. And the other thing, and maybe this is my cynicism, but I think there's something, but if I was a statutory worker, the reality is there are resource prioritisations. People do, if you're Becca or you're somebody else, who's in charge. And I know what Martin's saying, I absolutely agree, is a right. But there is something still within that people have to make decisions about what resources are being prioritised. So I think if I've got that question right, it's about the illusion of choice. Even we talk about it in housing, and in Housing First, we say to people, a key principle is that you can choose where you want to live, but the reality is you have to only choose where you want to live in terms of what anybody else within a waiting list would have to have the opportunity to choose. So there's always a kind of limit around that, and we're not all equal in terms of how we access things. Some of us are structurally disadvantaged within that. So I maybe gave you more of a problem than a solution. Sorry, Janine.
That's okay, Patrick. No, I think the last 18 months showed us very clearly we're definitely not all equal. We're not all experiencing things in the same way. Pauline, can I come to you next? What more can be done if people, how do people exercise choice and control when options are limited?
I would say in the organisation I work for, in Control Scotland, we work with folk up and down the country from really rural communities like Shetland or the Scottish Borders or. And a really important point about SDS is obviously it's able to offer choice and control with who supports you and how they do that. But that means if services are limited, then your choice can be compromised. But the thing that's really critical to remember about SDS is that if you take service providers out the picture, the point of the whole approach to self-directed support is about achieving outcomes and living a good life. And that doesn't necessarily have to tie into traditional services. If you can demonstrate that an activity takes you closer to your outcomes, so whether that's feeling healthier or more connected or having a purpose in your life, then it should be that you can achieve that without a traditional service. So you'll have heard examples possibly about using individual budgets to pay for gym memberships or to buy equipment or resources that'll make your life easier or maximise your independence. And it's really easy to forget about that and just think I need to use this budget to buy services, but that's really not the case. Obviously, if if a service or a bit of support is something that you need or want, however, that's completely within your right. And it can be really challenging to marry up what's available with what you need. And I would say, in our experience, that's for both rural and city environments. It can be felt more keenly in kind of more rural communities, but it's definitely depending on your needs or your aspirations. It can be felt across the board. But I suppose one thing that I would want to highlight is it's really important for service providers to be open to working differently and to think about the limitations that their approaches or their practices might be having and diminishing people's choice and control. If there are folk here from provider agencies, then there are organised and others that can help facilitate some of those conversations and think about how to change your practices and some of those probably tricky questions or awkward questions that Becca talked about before. The most obvious answer, I suppose, but also probably the most intimidating to folk is about taking a direct payment. If there's no staff available, then create your own, develop your own workforce. But that can be really daunting and really scary. But there's obviously lots of steps you can take to make that easier. There are 31 supporting the right direction funded SDS advice agencies across the country. So there's one in every local authority apart from Moray. They'll have resources, advice, people you can talk to, help you can get to help you plan for it. And that word plan actually is really important, because actually having someone to spend some time with you to think about and to plan for what you want to achieve is really, really important. And again, there's folk available to help you with that through social work or through your Support in the Right Direction funded agency. And the thinking part is really important there as well, working out what's important to you, what's your appetite for doing things differently, what risks are you willing to take and what would work best for your aspirations. But I really, really want to, I can't emphasise this point strongly enough, so sorry if I bang on about it, but self-directed support is about having a good life. It's not about having a good service. So if there's only a few services available or there are no services available, then something that SDS offers is the opportunity to do things differently and use what is available in your community around about you in a way that has the most positive impact for you. And thinking about how that makes sense for you and your situation, what you want to achieve, how much responsibility you're comfortable with taking. That's all an important part of the mix, but there's also those opportunities for providers as well, and using option 2 and thinking differently, doing things differently and creating new opportunities where they might not currently exist to help people live a good life.
Thanks, Pauline. In government, we're so addicted to jargon. We always talk about outcomes, good outcomes. I really like that, having a good life. I'm going to start using that. It's much clearer. Rebecca, can I come to you? So we've heard from Patrick about the illusion of choice. We've heard from Pauline about how important it is to have help to plan, and this is all about having a good life. You know, what are your thoughts? How do we support people to exercise choice when options are limited?
I think from a sort of strategy point of view, I think it's about, you know, local authority have a responsibility to research need and demand for support in the community. Yeah, that is about services and that's traditionally what we've done, but actually we're looking at SDS, that needs to expand to exactly what Pauline was speaking about. What other things are there within the community, within the, you know, other people's lives that would benefit and support individuals? I think from a lot of conversations I've had, often it is the sense of, okay, this service doesn't exist for me, so I'm going to go to the direct payments. And the thing I would ask is, okay, if one person is saying that, chances are 2 or 3 or more, you know, way more than that, people are also going to be saying that. So are the services we are delivering as a local authority the right services, or should we be adapting them to meet the needs of individuals? And I think it's also it's about a whole systems change, and it's about social workers as well being empowered to work that little bit differently and encouraging individuals to think outside the box and not just about those services.
Valid point. Yeah, Faith. Can I come to you now? What do you think is the answer? How do we support people to exercise and control when the options aren't there or are more limited?
I'm going to give an example of my person I care for that was referred by the psychologist to a mental health charity. I'm reading about choice and human rights. This mental health charity support worker was supporting them, was supposed to support them, but they were pressurising him to go and get a job, and he's not in the has the ability to. He has got the ability, but the mental health means that he struggles with work, so he didn't have that choice, and his human rights could be argued were breached. He ended up walking away from this support worker because he actually struggled with what the pressure he was under from that particular charity, and the support worker eventually admitted, we get paid to get people to go back to work, which is not good by the government, not a good thing to do. And my autistic relative, I've had to go down to the GP after she had issues with her psychiatrist, and said to the GP, please refer her to OT mental health, which took about 2 years to get the referral through to get support. He said about support, yes, support is there when it works. The OT's actually been helping the relative through the way she's been feeling and how her autism affects how she feels. So when the support is there, it's good. When the support is there and it puts some pressure, it's not good. It's very difficult to... It's good when the support's there and it comes together and it's fine, but it has to work, and you need to put the person's choice and human rights in it. And my own experience is it doesn't always work, and I get very little support for being a carer. I have a lot of experience, and I probably can teach a lot of people who provide care support. I say very little and go yes, no, and don't deal with it. So and don't really access them. So that's about it. Support, when it is there, works, but I've seen a lot of failures and a lot of issues, and I get a little support myself for what I do for my unhealthy needs and being a carer. So that's my practical point on this SDF. It has to work, and I haven't seen the facilities or anything there that does it.
I think you're absolutely right, Faith. Yeah, words and a strategy won't cut it yet. Has to work for people, doesn't it? Ailsa, can I come to you last of all? Yeah, what do we do when options are limited?
So completely, absolutely agree with everything that everybody has said, and Pauline in particular in relation to, when we talk about self-directed support, it doesn't necessarily have to mean traditional services. And I suppose within this context, it doesn't have to be a traditional housing support service where people are allocated support workers. That might not cut it for an individual. So what partnerships need to do is reflect on their commissioning processes. How is it they're commissioning those services? And they need to transform the way that they are delivering their services, how they're accessing funding, bringing, disinvesting in some traditional supports to bring some of that finance into the central pot to do things differently. And that's the transformational change that's just not happened in local authorities. There is this perception that actually, housing support is really effective for lots of people, but that's not what is needed for everybody. And we need to change the way that finance is accessed, so that people can truly access budgets for things that are not traditional. So as we've seen some, fantastic examples through, the Simon Community Research, things like mobile phones, gym equipment, all of these things contribute to helping people on the road to recovery and success in their life. And it goes back to, there's lots of agendas now emerging, just picking up on one of your comments, Janine, that, the word outcome is far too abstract. It means different things to different people. It means different things to people on the ground, as it does to services, as it does to Scottish Government. So what the Personal Outcomes Network has found through all of their years and years of research is that actually let's drop that term and start to talk about what matters to you. So just using that strap line, what matters to you, has been found to be the most effective way to capture somebody's outcomes. And it's a conversation. It's not tell me what outcomes you want to achieve, because the person then goes, well, what do you mean? Is that a goal? Is that, what is that? Just a natural conversation around what matters to you then elicits somebody to say, well, actually, getting back on my feet, getting proper rehabilitation from my drugs and alcohol issues, reconnecting with my children, reconnecting with family. They're the things that really matter to me, and they're my outcomes. So it really is about changing the language in which we're using at the moment as well, to try and identify really what matters, to really get underneath, well, what do we need to do to help that person achieve those outcomes? And it might not be the traditional supports, it might be something else, which requires finance, and it requires disinvestment in old traditional models. Not completely, because the old traditional models still work for some people, but for those that it doesn't cut it, that the finance needs to be there to be access to do things differently.
So I hope delegates will agree. Today we've got a plain speaking panel, and that's really refreshing, I think. So not so much jargon, people are telling it how it is. That's really, really helpful. I don't know if you're keeping an eye on the chat. So we're not getting questions, but we're getting lots of ringing endorsements of what you're saying. Some people sharing personal experience. I think it's hard as panel members for you to keep an eye on that and answer the really tough questions I'm giving you. But I'm gonna ask you a final question before we close this morning, if that's okay. We live in a time when people have unprecedented access to information. But to what extent do you think, is the information about support and choice made available and made accessible to people? And what do you think can be done to refine that and to improve it? Patrick, you first.
Great question, isn't it? It's the right information to the right people at the right time. And I suppose that one of the things we've seen, again, with structural inequality is that people are able to access information differently. I'm so reliant on the internet. I'm so reliant on, if somebody asks my question, I kind of look it up. I can sound quite smart, but we still have so many people, particularly who are affected by homelessness, who are digitally excluded. And I think we have to look at that. We have to look at that as a fundamental, and then any information, the great stuff that Ailsa's working on and others, that you can then communicate to people. But the thing that I would say as well is we have to empower frontline workers to understand SDS and to be able to communicate that. And we ask a lot of people who work in homelessness. They often have to be experts in so many different things, but I think that's so pivotal. The other thing is that you have good, courageous and informative conversations with other colleagues, particularly within the Health and Social Care Partnership. I think there's brilliant commissioners, there's brilliant frontline statutory workers who also want to make a difference and help people navigate their way through that system. So we have to get better at being able to do that as well. But I would just end with digital. Let's get it right there, and let's get the information that people need out there and give them it at the right time.
Digital. You should be a politician, Patrick. There. Pauline, can I come to you next? How do we get better at getting information out there, making things accessible to people?
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree again with a lot of what Patrick said. I'll say though, there are a fairly vast number of resources out there for around about self-directed support and how people can have choice and control. But it can be really hard working your way through the noise, I suppose, and figuring out what ones are most relevant to you. I'll not steal Ailsa's thunder because she'll probably talk a bit about the review of resources that's going on at the moment. But we're doing a bit of work with Social Work Scotland to review some of the resources on the Cairns Fitchett website, and there are tons. So if you're interested, go and have a wee look. But the one thing I'll say is, and Dr. Martin Kettle picked up on it as well this morning, is there is a real lack of resource around SDS and homelessness. And I think it's because things should evolve, and they are evolving, and that's great. It's a welcome next step in the evolution of the implementation of SDS. And it's just so interesting that these conversations are starting to happen. But what it means is folk can't quite put their finger on a resource to look at to really guide their thinking. And I think that it's important to say that applies as much to local authorities and providers as it does to people using services. This is a kind of evolving area of thinking, and we don't have the evidence base for it quite yet. But I think echo a wee bit of what Patrick said, that conversations are incredibly important. They're a great first step. So conversations like this one, and being able to start bringing the potential of self-directed support into the consciousness of providers, local authorities, people going through homelessness, and that's an incredibly important first step. But the second step needs to be a bit of action, and we need to think about how we put those ideas actually into practice and build that evidence base for what it could look like for others. I think that's the big gap at the moment, and I think I and lots of other people would be dead keen to continue this conversation with anyone that's up for it.
Thank you so much, Pauline. I'm hearing some lovely turns of phrase today, and I'm going to be kind of magpie-like. So I love this idea of working your way through the noise. I like courageous conversations from Patrick. So Rebecca, I'm going to come to you quickly before the cat interrupts you for Dreamies. But what do you think? To what extent is the information about choice made available? What can be done to refine it? What can be done to improve it?
So I think I agree to an extent with Patrick in terms of digital, but I think I'm quite old school in that there's certain things or conversations that need to be had face to face or person to person, and I think something as important as SDS is probably one of them. So for me, it's about social workers and frontline staff, having the capacity to spend time with individuals and guiding them through that process. It's also about, using advocacy, peer workers, mentoring, all the different resources that are already out there and adapting them to ensure that we're skilling up people to have those really important conversations for people who want to see, what the choices are out there. It's about training, it's about capacity to work with people and figuring out, I think, individually what the best way is for each person to communicate, what those choices are, because it will be different for everyone.
Right, yeah, and it's something that came up in the work that Simon Community Scotland did, that how important the face-to-face explanations were. So that's a really good point. Thanks, Rebecca. Faith, can I come to you now on the information and how we make it more accessible? What do you reckon?
Okay, I was having a quick look at for my local council what was available on the internet. There is information about, but if somebody's having a full mental health breakdown and what's caused the homeless, they're not going to start trawling through the internet, and it might be confusing. The person I care for, yes, he's got that person got full capacity, but I have to advocate quite a lot for them if there's issues. And if somebody's got a full mental health breakdown who's homeless, accessing the internet and accessing information could be a struggle. The need, as Rebecca was saying about advocacy, probably need trained advocates to be with them. I know there is a place in I think it's East Scotland that trains advocates, but I didn't see that quite a lot when I've been through working in different places. There's a lot of advocacy for people who've got substance misuse, but within the homeless sector could be more trained advocates available for people who are homeless, who work with them and who know the specialists in that subject in mental health homelessness. So that's more of a potential of development to get access to the appropriate support that they need, because a lot of people who go around the merry-go-round of mental health services, and unless they tap into the right support, it's just a continuous merry-go-round. So that needs to be looked at as well. I know the information's there, but it's getting access to it and understanding it and processing it.
Faith, yeah, we need to help people get off the merry-go-round, I think. Ailsa, can I come to you last of all?
Yeah,
we can
Oh,
get
sorry, thanks, Janine. Yeah, I think everybody's basically covered the two areas that I would bring to the surface. As Pauline said, you know, the SDS team are currently reviewing all of the SDS resources that are out there that are accessible for staff and for people. It's hosted on the Care Inspectorate's Learning Hub. What we have determined is that actually the landscape is awash with resources, but actually, are they all still up to date? Are they all still fit for purpose? Do they align to the new standards? You know, so we're going through a bit of an audit check, you know, with the view of discarding the ones that are no longer up to date. Identifying some gaps, if there are some gaps that are out there that need to be filled. You know, for example, Pauline was saying, you know, we don't have much research in terms of self-directed support and homelessness, so we might want to try and explore that a little bit further, try and dig a wee bit deeper, even looking abroad for national and international research and that to pool that into the central pot as well. We're looking to structure our resources around the framework of standards. So for each standard, what resource is appropriate? There might be general resources that don't fit neatly within each box of each standard, but that's okay. We'll have a general section as well. So that's one aspect, but I think the other aspect as well from the like I said, we've used active implementation science to, you know, to bring together all of the good work into a central pot to create a framework. And part of that framework, the only way that it will be implemented is if all of the actors in the system are fully trained and fully skilled to offer and commission and deliver self-directed support. And let's not forget that actually when workers are going out, social workers, for example, are going out and assessing people, it's their duty to offer self-directed support. It's their duty to know what that is and to understand it and to know how to put it into place. However, training from self-directed support, what we've found across lots of local authorities, is not always made mandatory. It's an optional training course. So I think what we would like to see going forward would be to make that training mandatory, so that everybody you know, can operate and you know, deliver their duties in the way that it's intended. So yeah, I think, you know, just putting self-directed support on a par with other pieces of legislation like adult protection and child protection, and making the training around that mandatory, I think, you know, would upskill a lot of the workforce around self-directed support and the offering of self-directed support and providing that information to the person on the receiving end.
That's a really good point. Thank you very much, Ailsa. You challenge there. There's so many comments in the chat. I'm not seeing questions for the panel, but mainly it's people agreeing strongly with what you're saying and sharing their thoughts on the debate. Some really useful comments there. Are there any final questions from delegates or the panel? Is there anything you've been itching to ask? If so, either put it in the chat or in the Q&A. We've got maybe 1 minute to think. I think we've had some really interesting comments today from our panel. We've heard about the illusion of choice. We've heard that this is really about how we help people to have a good life, that we need to, this is about asking simple questions like what matters to you. I really love these simple ideas. We've also heard about the importance of digital inclusion, but at the same time, that can't replace face-to-face contact and peer-to-peer support. We've heard about how we need to have courageous conversations, and we've heard how there can sometimes be too much information out there. It can be confusing, it can be alienating. We need to help people get off that merry-go-round. And finally, we've heard how training should be on self-directed support should be mandatory. Is there anything, oh, there is a question. Fantastic. From my colleague, David. Panel, is self-directed support the enemy within for support agencies that can kill their work? We're leaving you with an easy question from David there. Is it the enemy within?
As a support provider, absolutely not. I think that it's about giving people choice, and also giving people options, and I don't think any of us should be threatened by that.
Just agree, and if I can, and say the point of any social care is to do yourself out a job. That's literally the point of what we do as social care practitioners, is to be there until we don't need to be there anymore. So if somebody can get their choice and control through something that doesn't involve a paid support worker who's paid to be in their life, then that's what we're all working towards. A good question, Davy.
You'd like to say, Faith? Oh, you're on mute, I think.
I was doing the wrong box. The out of sound and cynical, there'll always be a handful of people who cannot cope with self-directed support, who would need help till they shuffle off this mortal coil and go to the grave. Chronic alcoholics who can't cope, people who've been through the care system, been institutionalised. You'll always get the handful who will always need help. Yes, it's very good, but sometimes I do think people are abandoned and left to it. It's very down note, but it's just my own experience.
It's really great to have your experience, Faith, on the panel. Thank you. Anything else, Elsa, Rebecca?
I suppose in response to Faith, I think there is a perception that self-directed support is only options 1 and 2. So you can either take a direct payment, or it's an ISF, where it's managed by a provider, or it's managed by the local authority on the person's behalf. But actually, people shouldn't be getting left. Self-directed support is a choice. And there should be other alternatives in terms of the traditional routes of services to support people. So nobody should be getting left or forced down a path of option 1 or 2. There should be also the choice of good supports, personalised supports under option 3 as well.
So I can see another question's come in, although we are over time. I don't know if I'm going to get told off for taking this one, but I think it's a really interesting question. What would you say to an individual who makes a decision which would clearly lead to more personal harm? Patrick, any thoughts on that? Pauline?
It's a one, there's a subjectivity in that as well, and I'm going to be a politician and avoid this a wee bit, but I think that one of the things it is touching on is there's a point whereby to be a provider, you sometimes have to give up control. So you have to empower sometimes people to make choices that don't necessarily fit with what your perception is. But I think I'm going to hand over to Ailsa, because I'm sure there's something within regulation and legislation. If that was very, very obvious, it would be stopped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so thanks, Patrick. Self-directed support is a balancing act of risk. And we have to remember that the person who's assessing the person, whether it's a social worker, a care manager, a housing support officer, they have a duty of care to that person. However, through exploration around what matters to the person, there has to be an element of risk enablement. If that person wants to take on risks that are not going to bring any harm to themselves, then the person should be supported to take on those risks, because we all take on risks in our own lives, in our everyday lives, and it's not about preventing people taking risks. But if those risks are going to bring harm to the person, then you have to remember that the worker has a duty of care to that person and to advise that person accordingly. We wouldn't be giving out budgets, for example, for people to continue with drug and alcohol use, for example, if that's where the underlying question's coming from. There are parameters by which self-directed support needs to be operated.
Thanks. Well, listen, we'll wrap up there. I'd like to say thank you to Patrick, Pauline, Rebecca, Ailsa and Faith. Thank you so much for being such a lively and frank speaking panel. It was a really good discussion. Thanks to Duncan and to David for your questions. And thanks to everyone making comments and encouraging remarks in the chat. That was really nice. Enjoy the rest of the conference. I really enjoyed this session. Thank you.